One Step Ahead by Lundquist and Beslick.
Hello and welcome to One Step Ahead Radio. Another week, another session, and the update around the world and what's really happening in the space of sustainability, responsible, sustainable ESG investments, developments that are influencing the world we are living in and our common future. James, as always, is hosting this session together with me. James, great to have you back on the show. And how are you doing today?
Hi, Sasha. Hello, everybody. Yes, welcome to another episode, One Step Ahead Radio. I am good. It's sunny and bright where I am. We're into the autumn season. It's fresh and bright, and so happy to reflect on another whirlwind week. We're going to be racing from AI, data centers, and the impact on the energy system. We're going to be dropping in the UK, taking the pulse on European environmental situation, and stopping by in the Vatican City to hear what Arnold Schwarzenegger and Pope Leo have in common to say about our common future, as you mentioned it. So we've got lots of enticing things to touch up on. Where do you want to?
No, James. I mean, you said it's a bright week, weather-wise. It is. Let's hope it's going to be bright towards the end of the session as well. So we keep the positive pace on what's going on. Let's start with AI. Everything, James, today is about AI. Wherever you turn around, it's AI, and there is a big question even within the investment sort of a universe or family of investors around the world about when the bubble will burst because of the huge amounts of money that has been and is invested in AI. But there's another story to it, and the story is related to energy demand. What is happening in that space? I mean, if you're looking at we've been looking together at this wholesale electricity price, especially in the US. I mean, it's staggering numbers, James. It's quite amazing, more expensive than it was before.
Yeah, no, interesting dynamics of what's happening in the American energy markets and electricity markets. So actually, Bloomberg came out with an analysis of wholesale electricity prices that they looked at tens of thousands of locations across the country and to map those with areas that have data centers. And the big number that they come up with is that there's an increase of 267% for a single month compared to 5 years ago in areas located near significant data center activity. So it's starting to give an idea of just how big that change is. And obviously there are lots of human stories about people who obviously see their bills going up, who nothing to do with AI, but regular people. So there's this ripple effect that's currently happening in a lot of American districts.
And the big question on this is that, of course, it's very close to these data centers. But the thing is that we are obviously having big difficulties to maintain the supply of energy in this pace and in this size or volume needed by artificial intelligence. And I really don't understand why politicians are not acting on this, because currently there is no regulation globally and even locally, regionally and nationally in countries about how much energy can be actually, assigned to development of artificial intelligence without impacting local communities. So it is a big political question, but it's actually a big economic question for people that will be affected.
Yes, indeed, and a lot of investment decisions being made, not just about big deals in the AI sector, but all the ramifications it has on everyone who's building the infrastructure, and that means getting back out all the gas turbines that we thought were going to be phased out. So there's companies that are having turnaround stories there in terms of seeing renewed enormous demand. That was the other story that came out of this that's just fresh out in terms of how we're going to meet that energy demand. What kind? We've talked before about Microsoft doing a deal to sort of keep 3 Mile Island nuclear facility online just for its own nuclear
purposes.
It's its own data centers, and then now it's like it's obviously there's a race to to have gas turbines, gas-fueled power generation in the US. Obviously, the US has plenty of gas. So there's also a sort of an industrial infrastructure story going on behind there as well.
But I'm thinking this is US, and of course these things will have significant impact in Europe. But before we go into the specifically on the UK, I mean there has been a report that came out that basically Europeans are paying and will pay far more in terms of the numbers. Climate breakdown is no longer a future threat; it is a present day drain on our economies and our security. And the numbers are quite interesting. Between 2020 and 2023, extreme heat, floods, and other climate-driven disasters are costing European Union on average 44.5 billion a year. This is a huge amount of money that is cost because of that. So, and if you sort of add now the energy of needed for artificial intelligence, even in Europe going forward, our way of life is really changing. But what is not changing, as it seems, even if we look at the UK, is there some political approaches to how this can be solved. And I've been reading on this development in the UK. What is really going on there, James, in the UK with this pushback on climate?
Well, you mentioned the word, well, we've mentioned the word costs.
Yeah.
Costs of energy, costs of electricity, costs to communities, which I think is perhaps a common theme here. In the UK this week, the opposition Conservative Party announced that it would scrap the UK's landmark climate change law that limits pollution and obviously sets in legislation the commitment to net zero in 2050. So undermining, I mean, it's already been, I think, 15 years that we've had this law in place. And so the argument of what they're saying, it seems to be a way to attack the Labour government in terms of the cost of climate change action that's going on. So again, it's a whole narrative around attacking Labour, saying climate change is real, but Labour's laws tied us up in red tape, loaded us with costs, and did nothing to cut global emissions, which comes from Kemi Badenoch, who's the current leader of the Conservatives, languishing in the polls, I must add, way behind Nigel Farage's reform, which has swept onto the scene in UK politics and making a big effort to fight against net zero and replicating a lot of the rhetoric that was coming out of the Trump administration.
Yeah.
So they're being attacked as really trying to undermine the whole environmental and climate movement and politicize it, and really use it as a way to attack politically around this question, of cost to, not actually changing and the wider world, but loading the poor British taxpayer consumer voter with unnecessary costs.
So it's basically, it's playing it back to the chorus of right wing sort of rhetoric and trying to. It's almost like it's a political game to gain the more votes from the Nigel Farage sort of a side of the table, which is not really addressing the
Feeds into a lot of other narratives around it that they find is very successful. We heard Trump at the UN, connecting the whole thing of Europe being devastated by green policies and migration policies. And so again, those are two very big issues in UK politics at the same time.
Yeah. And actually, the more pressing issues is, of course, how we're going to secure our economies going forward, given the extreme challenge we're going to have with the consequences of climate change. But that's something that taxpayers will most likely take care of, with some kind of a strange rhetorics from the right-wing parties. It's going to be interesting to follow where this will end in the UK. And when we talk about that, James, there are opposite voices to this in the world, and They are coming from different parts of the world, from a communist dictatorship, capitalist communist dictatorship of China, but they're also coming from some spiritual leaders for some big religion. In this case, the Pope in Rome has made a statement, and you mentioned Arnold Schwarzenegger. Was he part of that? I couldn't see that, but tell me a bit more about that.
So Arnold Schwarzenegger was the warm-up act to
Wow.
Pope Leo. So he turned up the day before the Pope spoke this week. Schwarzenegger is a Catholic and obviously well-known player on the American political scene, and it was connected to the 10th anniversary at the Vatican, the 10th anniversary of Pope Francis's Laudato Si, which was his major statement.
Call for action. Yeah, call for action. Yeah.
And so good old Arnold comes out and says, I'm not going to try and present and replicate his voice, but if every single one of the 1.4 billion Catholics can be a crusader for the environment and can help us terminate pollution, he comes out. It's great. It's fantastic. Yeah. But no, more seriously, obviously, the Pope made an important speech the week after we had the famous battle of narratives, as we called it, in the UN, and Pope Leo very much reiterating and reaffirming what was said in the Laudato Si 10 years ago, and making a very timely, important contribution and call out for environmental and climate action. And actually, I wanted to pick out this phrase, which in his speech I actually appreciated. We must shift from collecting data to caring, and from environmental discourse to an ecological conversation that transforms both personal and communal lifestyles.
Yes.
I mean, whether you are religious or not, whether you're Catholic or Christian or not, I think a lot of his words resound and speak very profoundly. So I don't know what you.
No, I think this intrigued me a lot because the spiritual angle of what calls the morality. I mean, it's lack of morality, it's lack of care, which is very interesting. And it goes, if you apply that to everyday discussions you have in the world of sustainability, it's all about how to collect more data, how to have transparency about that. But it is actually not about changing business models, which is somehow what he's trying to say. It also intrigued me to do a bit more digging, which I will do next couple of weeks, to see how the other spiritual communities in the world are actually treating climate change and what is their stance. And I will come back to in the show going forward with some of the other sort of spiritual religious leaders or communities around the world to see what they're actually saying. So I'll do some research on that, James, and then we can have a more sort of a joint spiritual religious discussion about their views in this particular topic. There is one more thing that I wanted to bring
Forward to that.
Yes, me too, actually. It's going to be interesting research. I'm looking at something currently which is caught my attention, and that's this enormous influx or import of solar panels in Africa. And solar shines in the rush for power in Africa, and it comes from China. And the latest numbers are really interesting because the petrostate of Nigeria is one of the biggest major importer, basically, of Chinese panels. And the solar is booming in Nigeria, in Egypt, in Algeria, in South Africa. And you can see a big sort of countries that you would normally not expect to have that kind of a, approach to energy. I mean, we all know that sun is shining in Africa 24 hours, basically, but Senegal and Ivory Coast are also countries that are putting a lot of resources. So there are things, going back to the narrative, there are things on the solar side, renewable side, happening in different parts of the world, which are not always in a mainstream media coverage. And we need these stories to come out, and we need people to see that the oil and gas narrative is actually not the narrative that is dominating in many developing countries. And this is probably one of the things that the mainstream media needs to become much better in, is to inform the public that there is transformation happening in the world.
And I think it's also very much, in terms of the solar revolution, it's very much a bottom-up process. Individual people finding that they have access to cheap alternative, gaining energy access, because obviously in Africa and in other developing countries, there's a huge problem of access to energy or very creaky energy infrastructure. Pakistan, I've already mentioned before, is a huge, incredible story about a huge boom in solar installations, just coming from ordinary people finding that it's actually not that expensive, and it gives them reliable access, including a battery, reliable access to electricity. And in fact, the state is now having a problem in terms of running the grid because so many people have left the grid. And so we're seeing, interesting numbers coming out of some African countries that might replicate that kind of staggering turnaround in very, very short period of time. It's just in 1 or 2 years. I think last year, Pakistan imported 17 gigawatts of solar panel.
It's amazing. It's amazing, yeah.
Those kind of things in other countries.
I mean, look, there is this sort of a backlog narrative sometimes coming out of the places like US and the administration in the US is actually not really aligned with what's happening in a parts of the financial industry as well, which is the growing interest for catastrophe, so-called cat bonds. And the reason for that is that insurance industry now routinely faces loss years of more than, listen to the number, 100 billion. That is basically number that capture only insured assets that are affected by floods, fires, wildfires, severe storms, and so on. And financial industry is actually growing these products and is giving alternative asset managers a way to take the other side of the climate change bet. So they are betting, against, in a way you can say, the climate catastrophes. And these groups use funds that ultimately flow from investors such as pension funds, family offices, and endowments to buy instruments that can provide higher yields than traditional fixed income offerings such as government bonds. So you're betting, with the catastrophe bonds. And it's interesting that these type of sort of reinsurance capital is increasingly coming from alternative investors, and they are growing. And insurance brokers who help companies and governments to buy insurance are largely delighted with the trend that they say help rein in soaring cost of cover. Without the massive influx of alternative capital, which is about 17 billion after 2015, reinsurance costs would have been much, much higher. Interesting development in the space, in the industry that is in principle ignoring the negative side or the cost, but is trying to make money on catastrophe bonds. Don't you think that, James? Interesting, isn't it?
So, so the question, so if I understand right, basically climate risk from or insurance risk connected to physical impacts of climate is being distributed and sent around into the financial system. So it's being offloaded from the reinsurers and put in the hands of other investors. So it's good that impact and that cost is being spread out. But then doesn't that mean also that the risk of a major event or major costs could become a financial risk for the system? The people, they love it when you have the good years and you get a good return on your investment. But then maybe once every, you have the black swans and the green swans that come along and they're going to have, a big hit. Isn't that a concern?
It is, and it's a bit of a packaging. You remember the 2008 and subprime sort of a thing. So it is a bit.
In my head as well.
Yeah. Look, it is a bit of a packaging. The trying to sort of offload risk from insurance with these reinsurance solutions. But in the same time, and I agree with you, it is posing another type of risk. I mean, you have insurance companies like Munich Re and Swiss Re. They can balance their exposure to Japanese earthquake, for example, against Florida hurricane, a terrorist attack in France, or a cyber attack in the UK. So, I mean, it's very catastrophe bonds are not only related to, things like climate change consequences or stuff like that. They also could be related to cyber attacks, as I said previously, or terrorist attacks and stuff like that. Uh,
Catastrophes generally.
yes, yes, and there are people in the industry that are protesting against this because they think you're taking the sort of a remote slice of a risk and you're signing up to cover only the least likely to occur perils and paying out last, and meanwhile collecting a steady drip of premium. So it is, it is a very, it's a complex risk spread behind this, and it is the one that eventually could lead to financial losses for many pension funds, endowments, and many others that are not really doing anything to prevent things, but are actually trying to make money on it, which is, morally very interesting topic to discuss. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. Good.
James, so I mean that will be, I guess, all for this week. We will, as I said, I will look at back and we will come back next week, and I'll try to have a look at the other spiritual, religious angles to climate change and what they're actually saying. And of course, there is a lot of coming
Lift our
out.
spirits.
Yes, yes, we need a light. We need a light. Of course, there has been a climate week in New York. A lot of discussions. I talked to some people about it. What I've heard was that it was more panels, much more behind the closed doors discussions. The companies are not really saying publicly anymore what they're doing, what they're trying to do. There are a lot of things happening in quiet, which is not necessarily bad, but I think we need narratives. We actually need somebody to stand up, and maybe that's something that we can come back to next week. James, once again, thank you for joining. Thank you for hosting, and we'll see each other next week.
Yep. Thanks to everybody for listening. In the words of Pope, there is no room for indifference or resignation, as he says. So
Yes.
we shall strive on and be with you next week. Have a good weekend. Thanks, Anthony. Thank you, Sasha.
Thanks. Bye.
into this whole geopolitical chess game that's being played at the moment. And as you were saying right at the beginning, in terms of the American officials putting pressure on Europe, for example, to water down their climate ambitions, it all plays in. You can't just think of one jurisdiction as a closed entity. They're all subject to this kind of constant recalibration of the global economic system since the Trump administration came into power.
Yeah. And this is something I think from political angle, it will be so interesting to touch upon some of these things and also have a look in what is politically on a positive side, what is actually being done on a political side. And I'll do some digging on that during next week, and then maybe we can discuss that and elaborate more and see if we can share that insight with the audience that we have on Step Ahead Radio, Jim.
Super. Look forward to it. Try and stay positive.
Yeah, well, try to stay positive, heads up, and then we'll see, where the world goes next week. Thank you very much for your time and insight this week. And for everybody listening to One Step Ahead Radio, thank you. And please join us again next week.
Thank you, everybody. Goodbye. Have a good weekend.
Bye-bye.